Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this evening's keynote speaker as part of a wonderful kickoff week for Nature and Art RX. Can you all hear me okay? All right. Thanks again for joining us. We do have folks joining through webinar, and this is being recorded this evening. So I'm very excited and honored to have the opportunity to introduce our speaker this evening, Dr. Donald A. Rakow is a retired associate professor in the section of horticulture, School of Integrative Plant Science at Cornell University. Dr. Rakow served as the executive director of Cornell Plantations, now Cornell Botanic Gardens, from 1996 to 2013. He is the co-author with Sharon Lee of Public Garden Management, Wiley & Sons, 2011, and with Ms. Lee and Professor Megan Goff of Public Gardens and Livable Cities, Cornell University Press, 2020. Dr. Rakow conducts research and writes on the human benefits of time in nature and directs the Campus Nature RX network, which includes 100 institutional members. He is also the co-author of the text Nature RX, Improving College Student Mental Health, Cornell University Press, 2019. He is a past recipient of both the Service Award and Award of Merit from the American Public Gardens Association and has served on the board and chaired numerous committees for the APGA. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Donald Rakow.
Thank you very much for that very warm introduction. I feel that I have been so warmly welcomed by Penn State University today. I have had just a terrific day visiting with members of the Nature and Art Steering Committee, attending a graduate seminar, touring both your environmental education center at Shaver Creek and visiting your fabulous new Palmer Art Museum and of course your Penn State Arboretum. It really has been a delightful and very fulfilling day for me today. So thank you for the invitation. Well, that's not the button. Ah, there we go. So I want to start this evening by asking each of you to close your eyes. And with your eyes closed, I want you to imagine an early childhood experience with nature. Hopefully one that had real meaning for you. So spend a few moments thinking about that. And now that you've had a chance to reflect on that early childhood nature experience, let me ask you to raise your hand and share it with us by shouting out. This is going to be a participatory presentation. So who is going to be brave and raise their hand to talk about their early childhood nature experience? Come on, don't be shy. Jason.
Memories in Scouts, camping and being out in nature.
And what particularly about those experiences, being out in nature with the Scouts, was meaningful, memorable to you?
Camp was really memorable, just a lot of good memories. I think it was a good community to be outside with. Just things to look forward to every year.
Wonderful. Let me hear of other memories. I'd love to hear from some of the students who have joined us this evening. And Erin has a microphone for those brave enough to speak.
A memory that comes to mind for me, I grew up in the state college, was at Shavers Creek as a kid doing log rolling through their summer camp. So finding salamanders and newts and
Ah,
ringneck snakes and whatnot.
wow. Log rolling as a kid, that's ambitious. And I can certainly understand why it's memorable for you. Thank you. And Erin has the microphone for others who would like to share. Erin, Rick, right in front of you.
I have a beautiful memory of walking with my grandmother in the forest and her showing me a large stone that had a crystal embedded in it. And that memory has always stuck with me. And I think it contributed to my interest in becoming a biologist.
Thank you for that, Rick. And for many people, an early nature memory does involve a particularly significant person in their lives, just as this memory for you was with your grandmother. And that young woman right there.
I grew up with my best friend going to her house in Maine, and we would make fairy houses together every summer. It's a really special memory.
So did she live in Maine, or did her family have a summer place in Maine?
Yeah, both of our families had summer houses next to each other. So we would go all the time together, which was awesome.
And again, a memory that involves someone that you are or were very close with, this friend, being out in nature. And what I think that says to us is how nature can be a force to bind us to other people, to form closer relationships through that mutual experience in nature. Well, let's hear from one more person.
My family has a state passed down through Louisiana. So for me, my fond nature memories would be with my great grandmother, with all of the horses that we had out in the pastures.
Oh, how wonderful that you had that experience with your great grandmother. Not many of us get that type of opportunity, and it sounds like you and she were able to appreciate that land together. So it's clear to me from your comments that we have a lot of real nature lovers in this audience, and I'm not surprised. The question, though, is why do we love nature? What is it about our relationship to the natural world that we find so comforting and compelling? A number of years ago, the great biologist and is the right term, Casey, he studied ants. Wilson was at Harvard University, spent many, many years studying ants, but in addition, he authored a book called Biophilia, The Diversity of Life. And Wilson did not coin the term biophilia, but he certainly popularized it through the publication of this book. And what Wilson meant in using the term biophilia is that we humans have an innate connection to the natural world that goes back to the earliest eons of human civilization. And Wilson further argues that while we have this natural connection to the natural world, in our highly technologically developed and fast-paced world today, we often don't recognize that biophilic connection, and it's what causes people to feel divorced from the natural world, to feel that the natural world doesn't really matter, and that any ways that we explore and exploit the natural world is fine because all of those resources are here on Earth specifically for us to exploit. Well, we all know how such an attitude is now impacting such issues as global climate change, global loss of biodiversity, even changing weather patterns. So Wilson, were he still alive, would argue that we all need to get back to that innate connection that we have with the natural world. There are a number of conditions that derive from our fast-paced, technologically based, and very demanding lives. I'm sure each of you has a demanding academic or professional life. And one of those conditions, as certainly is exemplified by this slide, is stress. Stress is typically measured through levels of salivary cortisol. How much cortisol is present on our tongues basically reflects how stressed we are. And we know that the more stressed we become, the higher those cortisol levels also become. So there have been a number of studies, particularly in Japan, but more recently in Europe and the US, that have asked fairly equal groups of people to spend 15, 20, 30 minutes of time either walking in a wooded setting or another natural setting, or walking an equal amount of time in an busy urban street. And not surprisingly, in virtually every such study, researchers have found that cortisol levels go way down for the nature walkers and remain at a plateau or go up for the urban walkers. So we know that there is this direct correlation between spending time out in nature and reducing your stress levels. We also know that being out in nature can reduce other negative psychological conditions, anxiety, depression, even suicidal ideation. As Erin mentioned in her introduction, I've been associated for a very long while with Cornell University, and we have had a very dark and tragic tradition of students taking their own lives, particularly by jumping into one of our gorges. The gorges are beautiful. In fact, one of Ithaca's taglines is "Ithaca is gorgeous," but when it is used in such a way, it is utterly tragic. Fortunately, I believe the last time that that occurred was a little over a year ago. That's still too recently. So we need to think about how nature, for college students like many of you, for all of us, can be, excuse me, an antidote to these damaging psychological conditions. I'd like to talk next about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is often associated with the fight or flight mechanism. When we see a threat, do we counter it by fighting, or do we run away from it through flight? Now, sympathetic nervous system was particularly important for humans in the prehistoric Paleolithic period, when a woolly mammoth might have been running from you. You knew flight was your only option. The sympathetic nervous system is still important to us today because all of us on a regular basis face different types of threats. Perhaps we're crossing a street and a car is turning left just as we're crossing, and we're confronted with that possibility that we're going to get run over. I can assure you your sympathetic nervous system has been activated, and you have to think instantly about, do I back up? Do I go forward? How do I get away from that car? Perhaps you are caring for a child and the child suddenly starts to run toward a dangerous place. You're going to utilize that instantaneous sympathetic nervous response to run after the child and bring them back to safety. Those are essential human responses, but they greatly increase our stress levels. Talk about cortisol levels skyrocketing. The parasympathetic nervous system, in contrast, is our rest and relaxation response. It allows us to feel calmer, to, if we have eaten recently, to digest, to lower our heart rate and improve our heart rate variability. And as this individual is showing, as our parasympathetic nervous system really takes over, we can utterly unwind. So why is it? Why do we have this series of beneficial impacts from spending time in nature? Back in the 1980s, a husband and wife team at the University of Michigan, Stephen and Rachel Kaplan, developed something called the intention restoration theory. I will get to what's on this slide in just a moment, but let me first present the basic premise of their theory. They feel that when we spend time staring at a laptop, or spend time on our iPhone, or spend time listening to a guy speaking up at a lectern, or spend time relating to our friends or professors, we're using the part of our brain that is our directed attention. And the more we stress that directed attention part of our brain, the more fatigued it becomes. And it can become so fatigued that we lose our sense of concentration. You've all had the experience of trying to remember a name, and you know that name, but suddenly it has slipped out of your mind. It's because that directed attention part of your brain is just fatigued and is saying, let me relax. Well, the Kaplans theorize that spending time in a wooded pathway, in a forest, allows us to focus instead on what they call soft fascination. We see patterns in the trees. We see leaves swaying from the light breeze. We might see moths or other insects flitting about. And we're not having to truly focus on any of those. Rather, we're allowing that sense of soft fascination to just encompass our being, and it allows that directed attention to relax and renew, so that when we go back to our laptops or our textbooks, we are more focused, our ability to concentrate has improved. Now, the Kaplans felt in developing what we call art that there are 4 conditions that ideally should be met to truly achieve what I've just been describing. The first is just being away from your normal circumstances, your dorm room, your classroom, your dining hall. The second is being fascinated, that sense of soft fascination I spoke of. Watching the insects flit back and forth, or watching the rhythm of a creek as it rumbles over stones. The third is extent. That is, that natural area you've gone off to has to be large enough that you feel you're truly separated from it. A couple of weeks ago, my wife and I were having just an awful day. So we decided that we were going to go to a neighboring town called Trumansburg and walk in the old growth forest there. The problem is that old growth forest is so small that we heard sirens coming from 2 different sides almost the entire time we were there. So we didn't have that sense of extent, and it really did not have the impact that we desired. And the fourth one that I find particularly interesting, the Kaplans call compatibility. How many of you are from completely different parts of the country, and Penn State University has been your first experience with the northern temperate forest? Any of you? One in the back. So I think what the Kaplans mean by compatibility is that if you've spent your whole life in the desert Southwest and you're used to seeing saguaros or prickly cactus as your plants, and suddenly you're in this dense, very, very green, verdant northern forest, that can actually be off-putting. That can feel like, I don't belong here. So those were the 4 conditions that the Kaplans laid out. Many other papers have been written since they first presented the theory that support different aspects of attention restoration theory. About that same time, a Swedish researcher named Roger Ulrich developed his own theory called stress reduction theory. And basically what he was saying is being in an unthreatening natural environment, like the kinds of green spaces or blue spaces I was just describing, activates a positive affective response internally. So we experience a decrease in stress, which involves reduced levels of negatively toned feelings and reductions in elevated physiological conditions. And there's a lot of research going on now that follows Ulrich's stress reduction theory, which postulates that the vagus nerve is critical in affecting the reduction in physiological strength, that physiological stress that he spoke about. Now, I mentioned earlier that when your directed attention is so attenuated that it's acting like a muscle that has had too heavy of a workload, that it can affect our memory. And research that was conducted at Stanford University showed that as we spend more and more time in nature, our ability to both recall facts and to perform simple memory tests goes way up. So again, going back to the Kaplan's theory, allowing that directed attention to relax is hugely important. It can also improve our sleep patterns. So much research recently has validated and confirmed that we humans function best on anywhere from 7 to 9 hours of sleep a night. Now, I have a question just for the students in the audience. By a show of hands, how many of you get 8 to 9 hours of sleep a night? A few of you. Good. You all should be getting that amount of sleep. And I know it's challenging because of all of the things you have to get done. But spending time walking in a green or blue area prior to going to bed, rather than staring at your iPhone and reading about the latest troubling headlines, can have a huge impact on your sleep pattern, on staying asleep throughout the night. And staying asleep at night is particularly important because it can be problematic if you do it during the day. I don't know how your coworkers or fellow students react to that, but at least he didn't spill the coffee on the laptop screen. There even is a series of studies that were actually initiated originally by that same Roger Ulrich, who developed the stress reduction theory, that says even looking out a window to a natural setting can have real impact on reducing stress and anxiety. Ulrich did his original study, and this is why I'm showing you a hospital room with patients who had just had gallbladder surgery. And this was back before the days of microsurgery, where a large incision actually had to be made. And what Ulrich did was study a number of patients in a single hospital, approximately half of whom had views out to a window of nature like you see here, and about half of whom had views of a parking lot. And what he found, remarkably, the only difference was their view outside. The nature viewers required less pain medication, spent fewer post-operative days in the hospital, and described their hospital experience more positively than did those who were staring out into a parking lot. There also has been a fascinating multi-decade study of nurses in the US, and you can see the citation there to the right. And in this study, one of the components of it has been to look at mortality, or looking at it more positively, life extension in nurses based on the amount of greenness where they live. So they divided the living circumstances, the neighborhood, the immediate neighborhood of all of these nurses, and there's tens of thousands of them in the study, into 4 quartiles of greenness. And they were able to find that those nurses that were in the top quartile had average life expectancies that were 15 to 20% longer, much lower incidence of cancers and of heart disease. So, wow, just living in a greener environment can extend your life and make you less likely, certainly not immune, but less likely to suffer from either cancer or heart problems. I'm also going to mention a study by Astle Burt and colleagues who looked at how contact with nature may be a remedy for loneliness. So we know today that there is essentially an epidemic of loneliness in this country. Too many people, whether they are teens, college students, young professionals, or middle-aged or older adults, don't have a sufficient cadre of peers who they can turn to and who they interact with on a regular basis. That's really unfortunate because we, as a human species, depend on our contacts with other people for stimulation, for conversation, for understanding, and for direction, and for solace in many cases. So in Astle Burt's work, he found that when individuals who have previously self-identified as being lonely, that when they are paired with someone to go out into nature with, someone to go on a forest walk with, that their self-reported sense of loneliness reduces significantly. So during the pandemic, we saw an enormous increase in the use of our national, state, and local parks because people felt rightly that being out in nature, maintaining appropriate social distance, was somewhere that they could be safe and not be affected by COVID. Since the reduction, I don't like to say that the pandemic is completely over, but since certainly the reduction in the severity of the pandemic, we fortunately are continuing to see people utilizing nature as a great way of getting together with others. I often say when meeting with students that nature is a great place for a cheap date because you don't have to worry about entry fees. You don't have to worry about how much items are going to cost because nature is there and generally free. So let's do a little bit of reviewing about some of the ways that nature benefits us. I've talked about how it can improve our sleep patterns, certainly how it reduces tension and stress, how it can improve our mood and outlook. There also have been studies, and I'll talk about this more in a bit, about how time in nature can boost our energy and endurance levels. I've spoken about how it improves concentration and memory recall in that large nurses study, how it can combat cardiovascular disease and conditions, and particularly when coupled with fairly rigorous physical exercise. And certainly when combined with regular exercise, how it can reduce the incidence of obesity. So I want to turn now to talking about how nature can positively impact humans in different stages of life. And this morning I had the very good fortune of meeting with, I think, 15 educators from the Hort Woods preschool. Am I saying that correctly? Preschool to kindergarten, and had a fascinating dialogue with those individuals. And one thing that we clearly agreed strongly about was the earlier children are introduced to nature, the more beneficial it is for them. And, you know, a 6-month-old in a baby carrier is absolutely seeing the nature around him or her and recognizing those natural elements as familiar and comfortable ones. We also know that nature, natural sites, are wonderful for building on children's innate curiosity and sense of wonder. Kids will explore anything in nature, whether it's turning stones over to see what insects or pill bugs have gathered under those stones, or whether it's following a leaf as it flutters from a tree down into a creek and then watching it float down the creek, or whether it's using natural elements to build something new. I mentioned to those teachers this morning that we have a great organization in Ithaca where I live called the Ithaca Children's Garden. I was exposed earlier today to the fabulous children's discovery area at the Arboretum. Really impressive. One part of the Ithaca Children's Garden is called, believe it or not, the Anarchy Zone. And it's made up of pieces of lumber, sticks, old rubber tires, other discarded objects. And the whole idea there is for kids to just use those elements however they want. And they delight in it. It's wonderful. Other parts of the children's garden use more natural objects to really foster that sense of children's curiosity. We also know that as kids interact and discover together and work out conflicts and decide how they're next going to play, it contributes to their sense of socialization and their sense of how to interact with peers. Such important learning that can take place in those natural settings. And we also know, based on a number of studies that have been conducted, that as young people are exposed to nature from a very young age, the more time they spend in those natural settings, the more eco-friendly, eco-positive behavior they tend to develop. So whether it is having posters at a rally, like we didn't start the fire, but we'll put it out, or whether it's convincing their family to develop more environmentally friendly practices, recycling, composting, reduced use of plastic, etc. Kids can be tremendously influenced by nature and influential with their peers and families. That's interesting. This doesn't seem to want to advance. Let me see if I can advance it this way. Oh, good, I can. There has, over the past couple of decades, been a fabulous new movement called the Green Schoolyards movement. I have seen too many schoolyards, especially in urban, but also suburban sites that are essentially concrete or asphalt with a few pieces of playground equipment. Those sites deprive young people of interacting with nature in ways that can be fun, fulfilling, and really meaningful to those kids. The Green Schoolyard movement says tear up the concrete, tear up the asphalt, and replace it with shrubs and grass and simple play structures and benches and trees for shade. And a number of studies have been done that have shown that when you compare kids who are surrounded by green schoolyards to ones who have to suffer through that concrete or asphalt, it not only contributes to their self-reported sense of well-being, but it actually gets translated into higher test scores. And that's the kind of thing that makes administrators stand up and notice. I just finished reading a book that had a tremendous influence on me called The Anxious Generation: How the Great Rewiring of Childhood is Causing an Epidemic of Mental Illness by Jonathan Haidt. So what does Haidt mean by the rewiring of childhood? Well, his basic premise is that because of media reports of child kidnappings or child molestations, that parents and guardians and other educators have become overprotective of children in the outdoors. Yes, you can go after school to your soccer practice or hockey practice, but no, you can't just wander in the woods nearby. Or yes, you can be on the football team, but you can't explore at our nearby creek. Well, Haidt feels that that's depriving young people of just those benefits that I had earlier been describing. At the same time, Haidt feels that we are being underprotective of children and youth in their use of particularly iPhones, but certainly all technological media, whether that is social media that we all are very familiar with, or it's websites or apps that young people are no longer having the same opportunity to be innocent, to enjoy the innocence of exploring nature in all its fullness. And instead, and particularly as kids get into the middle childhood or middle school years, kids are increasingly self-conscious. They're increasingly concerned about their appearance and how they present to the world. And it really has an impact on that sense of innocence. And what hate shows in a number of very compelling research-based graphs is that as a result, young people today have the highest levels recorded of stress, anxiety, depression, alienation, loneliness, you name it. So he advocates for no iPhones, no smartphones in schools. We've just adopted that in New York State. I don't know about here in Pennsylvania, but he also advocates no use of social media in the home while children are awake. And he is proposing some pretty radical changes, but he's doing so because he cares about young people so much and really does see a serious problem. The stress levels young people see today are being reflected in higher than manageable levels in psychological services, health clinics on campuses. They're being reflected in an increased level of negative behavior by young people. And I do care a lot about college students, having spent the past several decades with them. And there are a number of ways that we really can help our college-age students, which many of you are. About 13 years ago, I co-developed a new organization or approach at Cornell that we call Nature RX at Cornell. And its mission, as you can see here, is to reduce stress and thereby increase physical and mental health in students through their engagement with nature, and to cultivate in students an increased appreciation in nature. As Erin mentioned in her introduction, I am now retired from my positions at Cornell, but I'm really happy to share that there's a terrific young woman who works for Cornell Health who has taken over the Nature RX program and is expanding it in new and wonderful ways. One of the aspects of the Nature RX program is a nature prescription program offered through Cornell Health. So students who meet with health professionals, whether they are members of the CAPS program, the medical staff, the nursing staff, if that health professional feels that this student would benefit from time in nature, then there is a line in the student's electronic health record that states Nature RX discussed and recommended, and it's checked off. And that form of nature prescription was really developed by this individual on your right. That's Dr. Robert Czar. And he really started the nature prescription movement, first while he was a physician in the DC area, currently living in Ottawa with his family. But he started an organization called Park RX, and you can see that in the lower corner there, Park RX America. And his group works directly with health professionals to try to get them on board to do the same kind of nature prescription that I was describing we now have at Cornell. So Robert Zarr is both a friend and one of my real heroes. A second component of the Nature RX program at Cornell is a comprehensive website of nature sites that you can walk to within 10 minutes on the Cornell campus. And for each of these, we have GPS-based locators that will tell you exactly how to walk to them from wherever you are on the campus. And then a third component is a series of e-posters that are interspersed throughout the campus. So these say things like, did you know that time spent in nature can improve your sleep patterns? Another one says your test scores. A third one says your sense of social connection. So students see these boards regularly, and hopefully they're absorbing the message. In 2019, a colleague at College of William and Mary, Dr. Dorothy Ebus, and I started something that we call the Campus Nature RX Network. We started very modestly with 4 campuses, Cornell, William and Mary, University of Minnesota, and UC Davis. And in the 6 years since the inception of the network, we now have 99 colleges and universities scattered throughout the US and a couple even in Canada. So what do we offer these 99 schools that are part of the network? We have a bi-monthly electronic newsletter that's filled with information about components and innovative approaches to Nature RX programs on campus. We have an annual online symposium in the fall, which attracts better than 250 individuals. We have now an annual colloquium in the spring for full members, and we have a year-long Academy certificate program. And I'm really excited to announce that when we ran this academy for the first time this past academic year, one of the 5 campuses that were part of that initial cohort was Penn State University. And I'm so pleased to see a number of my friends from that group here this evening. Now I'd like to move on to talking about nature and adults. Now, we have considerable evidence that conducting a certain amount of exercise outdoors is actually better for us than conducting the same amount of exercise inside, and no, holding a plant while walking on a treadmill does not count as being in nature. So why is it that doing the same amount of exercise outside in a nature-filled site versus indoors in a gym is actually more beneficial? And the reason has to do with a number of volatile chemicals given off by pines and oaks and other trees called phytoncides. You can see the spelling of that at the top there. Phytoncides are actually natural defenses that these trees have to try to ward off insect and disease attacks. But when we take in these phytoncides through our nasal passages, it increases the production of white blood cells. And that's really beneficial because the higher concentration of white blood cells in our bodies helps us ward off all types of diseases. So you don't realize it when you're walking through a woods, but you're actually benefiting your body by this increase in white blood cell production through the intake of phytoncides. Well, finally, I'll talk about nature and older adults, a category that I find I have an increased interest in. I'm not sure why. But I'm going to stay on that for a moment. And we now know that this epidemic of loneliness that I spoke about earlier is particularly acute for older adults. As older adults lose spouses, companions, close friends, that can leave them very isolated. But research that has been done in recent years has shown that when older adults couple with other individuals and go out on nature walks, it can significantly reduce the incidence of loneliness, make people feel that their lives are more worthwhile, and therefore improve their overall sense of well-being and optimism about their futures. So you may be wondering, I hope you are, about what is the correct dose of a nature prescription pill. Research that colleagues and I have conducted at Cornell, where we reviewed a number of papers that have focused on the question, what's the minimum time dose in nature to positively impact the mental health of college-age students? And from those 14 papers, we found that as little as 15 minutes, 2 to 3 times a week, can have significant effects on what I was describing earlier as salivary cortisol levels, therefore stress levels, levels of anxiety and depression. So it doesn't take a lot of time to be out in nature, and you don't have to do it every day. But when you do it regularly for even short bursts of time, it can really improve your well-being. So, in conclusion, I want to argue that spending time can make you wealthy because nature provides a wealth of opportunities to explore and discover. It provides a wealth of opportunities to connect with others and make us feel that we are more socially bonded, and a wealth of opportunities to de-stress, to relax, and to have the energy and capacity to go on and to continue enjoying this rich and amazing life. So thank you for your attention, and I would be happy at this time to answer simple questions. No, I'm kidding. Any questions? Casey.
Well, Don, thank you for having us for coming out and such a wonderful lecture. One thing at first that I wanted to say is my cortisol was really stimulated at one point in time earlier in the presentation when you talked about E.O. Wilson and you put me on the spot. It's actually a myrmecologist who studies ants, an arachnologist studies spiders, and that's a very distinct reaction for those of us who may have some fear of the latter instead of the former.
Thank you for that clarification, and I won't make that error again.
Nor will I. My question goes back to the study from Kaplan, and the root of my question is incompatibility. And you used a really wonderful example of someone who is raised in a desert ecosystem coming to this environment. We have probably a quarter of our student body who come from the New York City metro area or an area of extremely high urbanization. And I've heard them express that they have a fear of not having concrete under their feet and being out in a forested area or being in an area that for them is unfamiliar. How do we reconcile that? And with all these outstanding benefits of nature, help them see that that prescription is helping them in the long term when their immediate feel is of incompatibility.
So it's a great question, Casey. For those of you who may not have heard it in its entirety, if you have grown up in a very urban environment, Midtown Manhattan, Brooklyn, and you are suddenly in this very verdant campus, which Penn State is, how do you overcome the discomfort individuals may have with that? And my response is through baby steps. You don't do it by taking that young person initially on a 30-mile hike through the densest forest in Pennsylvania. You do it by introducing them to the Arboretum and by seeing both the built elements of the Arboretum, and there certainly is concrete there, as well as seeing the more naturalistic elements of the Arboretum, so that it is a gradual transition for them rather than an initial total immersion. Other questions? Rick.
It seems like there might be an important role for communities in developing infrastructure in terms of natural spaces and personnel within government to kind of encourage, promote this kind of activity. I just wonder if there are movements along those lines.
So the question has to do with our communities, our state or federal government taking the initiative to improve green spaces. And the answer is on the local and regional and state levels, absolutely. I read regularly about fabulous new parks that have been created. Just the other day in the New York Times, there was a long piece on a new park in Atlanta, in a low-lying part of the city that in the past regularly flooded, and people's basements or first floors would be flooded. This park was constructed in such a way that it actually serves as a tub and as an absorbing area for runoff during extreme storms. When there aren't extreme storms, it's a wonderful new green space that thousands of people use. That's just one example of the really positive developments that are happening on the city or state level. I'll speak less about developments on the federal level. How about this row of 4 young women there? I'd love to hear a question from one of you.
What did
Can you hear me? Okay. What advice would you give towards the college students that are wanting to seek this form of Nature RX, but also deal with the difficulties of other students being so wrapped up in the realm of modern day technology?
So it's a great question. And if you didn't hear it, it's how can college students who are attracted to this approach of Nature RX, but whose peers are totally wrapped up in technology and all that implies, how to move forward in this? You have a wonderful group here on campus, the Nature and Art group, and they offer all sorts of activities during this Kickoff Nature and Art Week, but throughout the year. And you will find like-minded individuals going to the activities that Nature and Art are provided, and individuals who have found a balance between their use of technology and their engagement with the natural world. And I think that's really the key. So I want to thank you for being a very attentive audience. I want to again acknowledge how much I've appreciated the very warm hosting that Erin and others have provided today. So